Hello there, I'm Brian Hyde. Welcome to Nowhere to Hide. Today is September 11th, and that's a date that carries a fair amount of weight in American history, and for good reason. It proved to be a turning point in our nation's history, and those who were around for it know that nothing felt quite the same after that day. So, as we celebrate observe, I should say, September 11th this year, there's also an additional urgency and heaviness that I think a lot of people are feeling right now. And we're going to talk about that and how America's turning points can be painful and difficult, but also provide us with a very unique opportunity. Details are coming up.
All reporters are biased, the Idaho Press Club are biased, all media, newspaper, radio.
To be completely blunt here, Brian, and there are plans to expand
indoctrination.
That's right.
Well, Idahoans are also concerned.
Horror shot. That line would be moving a little bit farther west.
I'm like crying.
Nobody wants to see
dark money is influencing policy in our state.
Well, that's not how this works.
Once again, welcome to Nowhere to Hide. So September 11th, this is a date that, look, I'm going to show you an image here. And for a lot of people, this will bring a very visceral reaction. Oh, yes, I remember seeing the firefighters raising the flag and the wreckage of the World Trade Center. And I think most of us can pretty well define where we were on that day, assuming that we were around or old enough to remember. But 24 years ago, in time, our emotions subside a little bit. Do you remember what the emotions were like, though, in the immediate aftermath and during those events unfolding? We all went from disbelief to a strange combination of anger, tempered with sorrow, with rage, with fear, and just this incredible flood of emotions that had a lot of people unsure of, well, what do we do next? And, there were some decisions that were made in the aftermath of September 11th that were likely good and necessary. I think about September 12th, when people set aside their differences. And by people, I'm talking specifically Congress. You saw a lot of people put aside the political differences because it turns out in perspective, they didn't matter as much as we thought they did. And there was an almost unprecedented sense of unity that most of us had not really seen in our lifetimes up until that point. But there were also some missteps that were made. And it's because of people who were acting on emotion and people who were operating on rage rather than reason. And so it's a cautionary tale of when your emotions are running high, that's a good time to take a couple of breaths, maybe go touch some grass, but don't just run with the first impulse that you feel. Now, I share this with you because, yes, September 11th was a somber day, and it is a somber day in which we observe the loss of nearly 3,000 of our fellow Americans, as well as, all of the first responders who were so selfless in coming forth to help them and lost their lives in the process. But we're feeling a little extra weight today, and this has a lot to do with the assassination of Charlie Kirk yesterday at a Turning Point USA rally in Orem, Utah, of all places. I mean, when I think of dangerous places that he could have gone into, that really would not have considered, I wouldn't have considered that being, such a scary place. But sadly, Charlie was killed in front of, a crowd of thousands of people. As of the time that I'm making this video, they still don't know who it was. The gunman still has not been found. And so it leaves a lot of unanswered questions. But this much I know for sure. There are a lot of people, myself included, who are wrestling with some really strong emotions and maybe ping-ponging back and forth between sorrow at what his loss represents, as well as rage over how someone could be so short-sighted to take this man's life for whatever reasons they want to offer. But also, we see the people who just seem to enjoy that demonic sense of delight in seeing decent people killed. So we're looking for a bit of direction, I think most of us, and there's no shame in admitting this. I don't care where you were yesterday. Most people had some kind of a reaction, whether it was a sense of sorrow for Charlie and his family, or whether it was a sense of glee that finally a political opponent that they didn't know how to answer was out of the way. But I've got a couple of different things that I want to share with you that will hopefully take us out of that sense of, okay, what do we do? That paralysis of, well, I'm just floating along here on this current of emotions. There are some things that, first of all, we should know about Charlie and celebrate about him before we go too far, in the direction of we must find and exact some kind of, revenge for those who took him from us. I'm going to offer a couple things here for your consideration. And this is just in the interest of when bad things happen, we always have a choice as to how we choose to react. This is from Wayne Hoffman, former president of the Idaho Freedom Foundation. He shared a blog post today on his Substack, and one of the things he pointed out here I thought was super important. He says, throughout history, evil has always taken human form. Evil does its evil deeds and then leaves the rest of us to do its bidding quietly in the background, cheering as humans inflict yet more violence and vengeance on those who deserve what they're getting. I mean, I think most of us, if we were truthful, would say, yeah, we probably have had those kind of thoughts swimming through our minds, at some point in the last 24 hours. A single inhumane act leads to more of the same. Quickly comes the rationalization that it's virtuous to be settlers of scores, the arbiters of truth and justice, declarers of war. I mean, we certainly saw that after 9/11. Yet Charlie taught that we could have civil conversations with one another about difficult topics, that we could walk away more informed and understanding of each other's positions, and that we could all be better for it. He taught us that it's okay, even necessary, to sit on a public stage and be challenged on our opinions and beliefs. And he died doing this. And this is one of the things that to me makes Charlie Kirk such an admirable figure. He was literally the guy who was about having dialogue and never lost his sense of humanity when talking to people, even those who were very vulgar and very brash and seeking attention in the way that they confronted him. He never stooped to that level. He always addressed them with a sense of humanity and a gentle sense of humor. He could laugh at himself. I do love this observation that Matt Edwards made, and he quotes, this is a tweet from Charlie from back in June. When things are moving very fast and people are losing their minds, it's important to stay grounded. Turn off your phone, read scripture, spend time with friends. Remember, internet fury is not real life. It's going to be okay. And, maybe this is more for me than it is for anybody else, but I needed to hear that because there's a lot of emotions being expressed right now, for good or for bad, on social media. If you've been on social media, especially a fair amount, you're probably feeling a little bit overwhelmed. But I want to focus a little bit on who Charlie Kirk was, more specifically, what he stood for that made him such a unique ambassador for the cause of freedom. And I say this with the utmost admiration. This was a guy who I believe actually brought people over to the side of freedom more effectively than anybody that I can remember within my lifetime. And it wasn't just about political victories, as you're going to see. So here are a few things about Charlie Kirk that you may or may not have known, but they need to be known if we're to honor his legacy. This is from an interview that he was doing where he was asked how he wanted to be remembered. And what an answer he gives here. He says, I want to be remembered for my courage, or for courage for my faith. That would be the most important thing. The most important thing is my faith in my life. Now, people who portray him as, well, he was just a political animal and he was just out there to own the libs and so forth. No, that's not at all what he was doing. If he was, he would have done it in a much different way. But he was actually there, presumably driven by his faith and his love of his fellow man, to invite people, especially to invite those who disagreed with him, to come and talk with him. And he would let them have their say. It wasn't like he was talking over the top of them and trying to shut them down at every turn. He actually gave them a chance to have their say and to be heard. And it was interesting how many of them would squander that just for a chance to sling insults or to sling some kind of vitriol at him, like, a bunch of primates in a cage who are tired of their audience. I mean, he was a master class in self-control and diplomacy. And I have to believe this probably comes down to, it's because he saw them as something more than just a foe to be conquered. He actually saw them as a prize to be won. And I think that's a lesson that every one of us could probably benefit from in terms of how we approach moving the cause of freedom. There's something else that goes along with this. Actually, let me take a step back for just 1 second. There was another interview. This was the Whatever podcast. And I believe he was on there and he was being interviewed across the table from a number of young ladies who were making their living doing OnlyFans and so forth. I mean, so, we're talking morally polar opposites sitting there having this conversation. And it was so curious to see him get them nodding in agreement with him when he talked about how much joy and how much satisfaction he found in family. In fact, he talked about how family was one of the greatest sources of happiness in his life. And he talked about, he's flown on Air Force One. He's met with presidents. He's met with heads of state. This is a guy who has stood in some pretty important places in the course of his career. I mean, he was only 31, but he had done a lot. And yet he said, there's absolutely nothing that compares to what he feels or what he felt when his daughter would run up to him and grab his legs when he returned home after a day's work. Maybe some of you can relate, maybe some of you can't, but it was very curious to see, again, these young ladies who, polar opposites of where Charlie was coming from, but they were all nodding thoughtfully and saying, yeah, actually, I can see that. So a couple of things I'm going to invite you to consider being a part of. If you would like to honor this man's legacy, first and foremost, I would encourage you, focus on what you can do to emulate his example in picking up that torch and carrying it on, the torch of freedom. It's not about crushing your enemies. It's not about owning the libtards, as some people would tell you. It's about winning hearts and minds and helping them see why freedom is the most precious gift that any of us can ever access. And you know, he gave the great example of how to do this. Now, if you want to help his family, here is an opportunity. The address is hard to see, but it's givesendgo.com/Charlie Kirk. And I have to share this too, because there will always be predictable detractors who, you know, want to make it about them. They're looking for attention. Let them starve for the attention that they're seeking. Let them wither and just, you know, slowly die away. This is about what can you do to help his family. The person who founded this Give, Send, Go Liberty Memes Foundation makes it clear. This is for Charlie Kirk's wife and children. Charlie Kirk was cut down today by a cowardly gunman. He leaves behind a grieving family. 100% of the proceeds from this fund will be given directly to his wife and children, paid out directly from the Give, Send, Go platform. And they will not take any percentage points of proceeds from the fundraiser. So if that's a cause that you feel inspired to be a part of, know that this is the pledge that's been made very publicly. Now, there are a couple of memorial services or vigils, actually, that'll be held here in Idaho. One of them coming up, actually, I believe it's this evening, 7:15 to 8 p.m. This is at McEwen Park in Coeur d'Alene. And there was a great vigil that took place last night at the Capitol in Boise. I've heard different estimates, perhaps as many as 1,000 people. At least there were hundreds of people who came out. And look, I'm guessing maybe a tiny handful of them actually knew Charlie Kirk personally, but many of them resonated, the vast majority resonated with his message of freedom and that keeping that dialogue alive. And not just keeping it alive, but in such a way that you don't shed your humanity in the process. So if you're in North Idaho, here's your opportunity to go and stand with others who likewise recognize his contribution and feel his losses. There's another one coming up. This will be on the steps of the Idaho State Capitol tomorrow, September 12th, 7:45 p.m. Prayer and exhortation for our nation and for the Kirk family. Candles, Christ-honoring signs, and respectful attire encouraged. There will always be those tiny handful of people who will try to make it about themselves. Don't give them attention. Just don't. If this is something that calls to you, you know, go and stand with others and see you are not alone. You are not out of step to be one who loves freedom and appreciates those who have made deep sacrifices for it. And this brings us to, I guess, the central message is freedom has always required people who were willing to invest more than just lip service. Now, it's very unexpected to see somebody who is committed to the cause of freedom shot down on a college campus in the middle of a public gathering like this. And I'm sure we'll be learning more about this in the days ahead. But if you wish to honor Charlie's legacy, the best way you can do that is to become a more effective ambassador of freedom yourself. We are at a turning point. And like we saw with 9/11, there were some steps that were taken that were good and right. There were other steps that are still haunting us to this day. So let's think before we leap. Let's know what we stand for, and let's make this a turning point that counts. I'm Brian Hyde, and this is Nowhere to Hide.
All reporters are biased. The Idaho Press Club are biased. All media, newspaper, radio.
To be completely blunt here, Brian, and there are plans to expand
indoctrination.
That's right.
Well, Idahoans are also concerned.
Horror shot. That line would be moving a little bit farther west.
I'm like crying.
Nobody wants to see
Dark money is influencing policy in our state.